So this picture of the church gathered and scattered, and tying that again back to this purpose for which the church exists, that the church was called into being by God to train people for life in the kingdom, for working, co-laboring with God toward this Isaiah 61 vision. Really, we need both. We need the gathering and the scattering. We need the being and the doing to be effective at that mission. If all we're doing is gathering, and just kind of resting in that being, of being poured into, of receiving, of being loved and trained and formed and shaped, but we never go out, we never do the scattering, we never get sent into the world to do, then we won't be very effective at partnering with God in this mission. And vice versa. If all we ever do is the scattering and the going and the doing, but we never participate in the community of God gathered, then that too also will cause us to be very ineffective at our mission. So we won't be faithful to God's call on the church if we only gather or only scatter, but it requires both to be faithful to what God has called us to do.
Yeah. So Steve and I have talked about this, and others have talked about this often, is how the church actually is relatively ineffective, and we're not accomplishing the mission God gave us. And we've talked about some of the reasons why that might be. One that I see personally is churches that meet, they do the normal church stuff, and people have put that in one box, and then the rest of their life is in a different box, and the two don't work together, and the church is not as effective as it needs to be in equipping and discipling people so that the church scattered actually works and makes a difference in the world. And Steve, you might want to talk about the church scattered and some of its issues.
Yeah. Well, so what I heard you say is that if all the church does is gather, then you got a bunch of people gathered in one spot, not really doing much good for anything outside that spot. I think vice versa, I see often Christians who have bought into that idea of scattering, of doing, of going, of being the hands and feet of Jesus to the world. And oftentimes I see those Christians also being ineffective because they have forsaken the church gathered, and their doing is not empowered by the being. It's they're not receiving the benefit and the fruit of the church gathered. They're not being lifted up. They're not being encouraged. They're not being supported. They're not being healed and loved and trained within the context of the church gathered. Again, obviously, John and I are talking in generalities. This isn't everybody everywhere, but
Right.
It's certainly a thing that I've seen happen in the lives of Christians who are engaging in the work. They're doing, but they're missing out on the being.
So, what do you think we should? How should Christians proceed? How should the church proceed with this challenge of being and doing, gathered and scattered? And how would you characterize the current situation in the church? I think we're both pretty passionate that things have to change, that we have to get a much more balanced view of the church gathered and the church scattered. But I think we're also pretty intent on seeing it change, and that's the reason for this video.
Yeah.